My name is Jenny Olson. I am the Prevention Director at Mentis, the Chair of the Napa County Suicide Prevention Council, and I also serve on the Board of Trustees here at Napa Valley College. I'm so excited to share this day with you all as we continue to break the stigma around suicide and learn how we can support those who are struggling with suicide ideation as well as survivors of suicide loss. We have a full day of really great learning opportunities, starting with our keynote speaker in just a few moments. Candace is the founder and CEO of Restorative Minds Therapeutic and Wellness Services in Bowie, Maryland. She is a mother of two young men, Bryson and Braxton, an author, a minister, a board-certified licensed social worker, a psychotherapist, a United States Air Force veteran, and a suicide survivor. Candace graduated from Bowie State University with a bachelor's degree in psychology and Howard University with a master's in social work. With more than 10 years of clinical experience and a lifetime of lived experience, Candace specializes in providing mental health services through advocacy, consulting, education, and clinical support. She is here today to share about her personal experience with suicide ideation, what helped her survive her darkest times, and what inspires her to share her message of hope and restoration. Please join me in welcoming Candace Washington.
Thank you. Thank you. Napa Valley, it is so good to be here. I'm back here, everyone. Can you see me? It is so good to be with you all today. Thank you so much for welcoming me to Napa Valley. Oh my gosh, 6 hours on the plane. And when I got off the plane, I just felt all of you all's love. So thank you so much for welcoming me. I'm a therapist, so I like to talk. And I always like to come and touch who it is that I'm speaking with, okay? So I just have a few questions. Is that okay? Is that okay? All right, I'm gonna start with you. What are you grateful for? He's grateful for his son. He's grateful for his son. What makes you happy? Your family. She said what makes her happy is her family. What makes you smile? Your dog. Your dog. What's your favorite meal? Pizza. I had pizza last night for dinner. Pizza. What's your favorite movie? Aquila and the Spelling Bee. What's your favorite song? Yes. Breathe me. Breathe me. Those questions that I asked, by a show of hands, could you have answered all of those questions? By a show of hands, you could have answered all of those questions. Well, I'm gonna walk and keep talking to the stage. However, there was a time in my life where I could not answer not one of those questions. I didn't know what I was grateful for. I didn't know my favorite song. I didn't even think about my favorite meal. Trauma, pain, abuse, loss, it changes you. It changes how you think. It changes how you feel. It changes how you see yourself. And it also changes how you see the world. Dr. Nadine Burke Harris, she was the former Surgeon General for the state of California. She reports that 1 in 3 children before they turn 16, they have endured an adverse childhood experience due to neglect, due to oppression, due to abuse, community violence. And I was in that number, that 1 in 3. At the age of 5, I had so many dreams. And it's so interesting that we're here at the Performing Arts Center. I loved dancing, I loved music. And that was my first source of healing, was the arts. Due to my experiences at that time in my environment, I used my pen, my journal, my stereo, and my television to escape the reality and go into another space. It was at the age of 5 that I was molested by a family friend. It was at the age of 5 that I learned how to mask my pain. It was at the age of 5 that I learned how to suffer in silence. It was at the age of 5 that I learned the art of suppression. So I grew up allowing myself not to put language on my experiences, on my pain, and I learned how to achieve over them. I would go to school, get straight A's. I would go to school and play with my friends and didn't tell anyone about the trauma that I was enduring. And at the age of 16, because shame, it lives. And when we tell our stories, shame dies. But because that shame and that guilt was so heavy, I was still blaming a 5-year-old little girl for something that she didn't ask for. I was still blaming a 5-year-old little girl for something that she didn't invite into her space. I was blaming myself for an experience that I knew nothing about. And because I didn't know how to put language on it, I turned to vices. And we all have our vices, though they may not all be extreme. It could be mild, moderate to severe. We all have our vices. And for me, it was relationships at 16. And at 19, I became a teen mother because of that. But I want to go back to 16 for a second, and then I'm going to speed us up a little bit. Because I was dealing with the trauma of my childhood, and for some of us, we have grown up in communities where what goes on in this house, say it again, what goes on in this house, and children are supposed to be seen and not heard. You're 16. What do you have to be depressed about? You're 16. What do you have to be anxious about? Do you have any bills? Well, you just have to go to school, listen to your teachers, and do what you're supposed to do. What do you have to be depressed about? But 45% of children experience an adverse childhood experience, and trauma changes you. It changes you. So at 16, I started thinking about suicide for the first time. I started hearing these voices. Candace, you don't deserve to be here. No one loves you. No one sees you. And I gave in to that voice. And at 16, I locked myself in the bathroom and I swallowed a whole bottle of pills. And I woke up the next morning, very, very sick physically. But you want to know my first thought when I woke up? I'm still here. It didn't work. So again, because at 5, I learned how to what? Mask and suppress. That's what I did. That's what I did. And I kept journeying through life. And like I said, my vice was becoming hypersexual in my lifestyle. And I got pregnant at 19. But because I formed that achievement addiction, I knew how to mask my pain well. I went off to college, went off to the Air Force, and I was 23 now at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, Ohio. 23 with a 3-year-old son. And I remember my first day, I went to a newcomers orientation, and I met a gentleman there. And at that specific space, there were not a lot of minority officers in that area. So in my mind, I see this African-American major, and I'm thinking, oh, maybe he wants to mentor me, right? But what I didn't realize is that he was grooming me. So for months, he was mentoring me, introducing me to the Air Force. And then he started making advances towards me. And I didn't know what to do with that. And again, I went back to what I knew, which was suffering in silence. No one's going to believe me. And I remember having the courage to share it with a coworker of mine. And it got to the point that this gentleman started to harass me, started to stalk me. We would go to briefings and he wasn't even in my command and he would just be waiting outside for me. It was to the point where I would lock myself into the bathroom. I would lie and say that I'm out of the office when I know that I was in the office just to get away from him. And at this time, I didn't have any close family in Dayton, Ohio. So those thoughts of suicide, it just came right back. And by this time, I had a different vice, alcohol. Alcohol and I were best friends, best friends. That is where I went to mask a lot of my pain. And in my mind, the 5-year-old little girl came back because having years of chronic depression and unresolved trauma and never touching it, but achieving over it and doing all the great things over it, I never addressed the root. And I remember sitting there one night, and at this time, my mom came, Bryson, and got Bryson, my oldest. And alcohol and I just became really good friends. And I started drinking excessively, to deal with the trauma of that present experience. But again, the 5-year-old little girl within me and now the 23-year-old are looking at each other face to face. And I'm honest, I didn't make wise decisions. I, got in the car a few times behind the wheel, intoxicated. I became passively suicidal. I didn't have a plan at 23. It was just like, if I die, I die. If I go out here today and something happens to me, oh well. And I remember one night I was behind the wheel and those thoughts of suicide returned. Candace, you're worthless. No one sees you. No one cares. Look at all of these years of feeling unprotected, because that's how I felt. I felt unprotected. And I got behind the wheel and I crashed my car. And when I crashed my car, I came to, and the first thought again was, it didn't work. I'm still here. Why am I still here? And I saw a car to my left. It was 1:30 in the morning, and I waved that car down. What I didn't realize was that I was waving down a police officer. You would think that experience would have gotten me together, right? I saw the police officer. I'd never been in trouble. I never was arrested before. So that experience within itself, honestly, was traumatizing for me. But I was so intoxicated. The first thing he said, because he could smell the alcohol reeking from my truck at the time, he could smell it on my breath. He asked me that startling question, ma'am, have you been drinking? And he said, I want you to walk this line. And I stood up and tried to get myself together. And I walked the line and I took 2 steps. And all I remember is my face hitting the pavement. And when I came to, I was in the back of a police car in handcuffs, being taken to the county jail. And sitting on that cold floor in the jail cell, you would think that would have sent a message to me, Candace, get it together, right? I remember standing in front of the judge, and she said, you deserve 180 days in jail. 180 days. And I remember looking behind me and seeing my mom frantic and crying. And I'm asking myself, how did I get here? And the judge said, because you don't have a record, I'm going to waive 177 days, and I'm going to send you to a drug and alcohol treatment program. I said, God, that's grace. That's grace. And I went to this program, and I was scared out of my mind. And I remember an older lady, she came up to me. She said, I don't know how you got here. I don't know your story, but you deserve to be here. I don't ever want to see you in a place like this again. You deserve to be here. This is not your final destination. A lot of times we treat what we see at the tip of the iceberg, but we never ask the questions that we need to be asking one another. People saw the alcoholism, but never asked me the story behind why I picked up the bottle in the first place. So that program got me together for a little bit because, again, I wasn't treating the root of the problem. I was treating the what? the alcoholism. I was just like, alcohol's the problem. So I pulled away. I pulled away. And because of that experience, I decided to get out of the Air Force because at that time, my mental health, I just wasn't well. And I got out and I got married. And marriage is a mirror for a lot of, who's married in here? Beautiful. Marriage is a mirror. And because it's so beautiful, you also marry that person's experiences. You marry their trauma, their pain, their journey, their resolved pain, their unresolved pain. It's a journey. And when I got married, I thought I was well. I'll be honest. I said I stopped drinking. I never dealt with the 5-year-old. I never dealt with the 16-year-old. Really didn't deal with the 20-year-old Candace also. But again, because I was treating the tip of the iceberg, the alcoholism, I said I was good. So I went off and got my master's in social work and wanted to understand the mind. And it was honestly my personal experiences that got me into the field in the first place. And I wanted to go back to the Air Force and help those sexual assault survivors. And I think it was to honor little Candace too. And I remember when I got married, my husband, at the time, we were stationed in Germany. And I got pregnant, had another baby, Braxton. And then things went left in the marriage, and we started experiencing a lot of turmoil. And his unresolved trauma and my unresolved trauma married, and it met. And we didn't have the tools to navigate all of this. And hurt people. So we began to hurt each other. And because I had my beautiful son, Braxton, and at the time I was nursing him, I was dealing with so much unresolved pain that I made the decision to stop nursing him so I can pick up the bottle again. I made that decision to stop nursing him, and then I went back to my vice, which was, I went right back to it. And hurt Candace doesn't hurt other people. Hurt Candace hurts herself. And those thoughts just started coming back. No one loves you. The boys will be better off without you. No one sees you. You're being selfish. You're weak. You're not strong enough. Didn't you go to school for this? Don't you understand the mind? Shouldn't you know how to heal yourself? But I always say, think about it like this. Think about a cardiologist. If that cardiologist had a medical emergency, can he or she go into the operating room and operate on themselves? They cannot. These thoughts of suicide just started coming back. And I remember being in Stuttgart, Germany. I woke up that morning and I saw the stained tears and the makeup running down my face. My hair at the time, I had a lot of hair at one time. My hair at the time all over my head. And I remember walking into the living room and seeing my husband at the time and our 2 boys playing and laughing. And I opened up the door and I told them I'll be back. And I got in the car and I went to the nearest ballpark. What felt like a few minutes, it actually was me sitting in that park the entire day, crying, contemplating, thinking. And one of the thoughts I had, and I texted to my husband, I said, do you think the boys and you would be better off without me? And he persuaded me. He gave me some hope to come back. And then a few weeks later, he asked for a divorce. That was just like a knife, just went, and the 5-year-old little me came up, that 16-year-old me came up, that 20-year-old me came up, and here I am, 31, with 2 boys. And I went back to Maryland with my oldest and my youngest. He was 1 at the time on my hip. And I went back to Maryland, went back home, and I didn't have time to unpack that trauma. For the first time in my life, my past trauma and my present trauma collided. But I'm a mom. I don't have time not to be okay. I have to get these kids into school. I have to get back to my job. I have to provide for them. And that's what I did. I sucked it up and I did what I had to do. But I neglected me in the process. One of the things that I learned during that time is that it's not okay to not be okay. That was the message. That was the negative message I learned. I don't have time not to be okay. And I started planning. I started looking at life policies. I started looking at my beneficiaries. I started planning how I was going to die because I was tired of living. Jenny, I was exhausted. And one of the things that I remember my mom shared with me at the time, she said, you got to get it together. You got to snap out of it. And I realized I'm not the first person that experienced sexual abuse. I'm not the first person that is going through a divorce. I'm not the first teen mom. I'm not the first person that's experienced domestic violence. So I started to minimize and suppress my experiences, and I started to serve over them. I started to support others over them. By this time I was a minister. I was praying over people while I myself was bleeding on the inside, because that is what the societal messages was telling me. You have to be strong. When do I have an opportunity to not be okay? I remember December 2019. Now we're divorced, and I remember my ex-husband sending me a picture of the boys. It was my first Christmas without the boys. I remember him sending me a picture. It was a beautiful picture. And I looked at Bryson and Braxton's faces and just saw them so full of life. And there was a message that said, see, Candace, they'll be okay without you. They'll be okay without you. Do it. My plan at the time was to run off the Chesapeake Bay Bridge in Annapolis, Maryland. It was so vivid in my mind that I dreamed of the water. I can envision myself drowning. I can taste the salt of the water in my dreams. There were so many nights before December 2019 where I would purposely make Bryson and Braxton sleep in the bed with me. So in the middle of the night, when the night terrors came, when those suicidal thoughts came, when depression sat heavy on my chest, I could touch them to send a message to my mind. Candace, your life is worth living. Candace, the boys need you. There were times where I would lock myself in a bathroom for hours and just cry. There were times where I couldn't even get out of the bed. There were times that I didn't show up for work. There were other times that I smiled through it. There were other times that I was at social events. There were other times I showed up for work and put that smile on my face because I knew how to wear the mask, and I knew how to wear it very well. December 2019, by that time, I was out of here. I checked out. I had my plan. I had my bottle. I was so intoxicated, Eric, that night. So intoxicated. And when I saw that picture, there was another voice that whispered, Candace, if you make this decision, your pain stops, but their pain is just begun. Your pain stops. But if you make this decision, you are transferring your pain onto these two little boys. And you are not going to be here to answer their questions. You are not going to be here to say, Mommy didn't want to do it. I was fighting. You wouldn't be here. So now that generational trauma, that cycle, you're passing it down because you won't be here to answer their questions, to tell them it wasn't your fault. Bryson and Braxton wasn't there at 5. They wasn't there at 16. They wasn't there in my 20s. They had nothing to do with their dad and I. None of that was their fault. But just imagine that guilt they could have potentially be carrying if I would have made that decision. And when I got that message for the first time, it's almost like I morphed back into my 5-year-old self, and I just wept because I remember the pain of my 5-year-old, and I said, oh my God, I don't want my boys to feel this pain. And I made that decision, and I said, God, if you help me through this, I have to feel it. We all have vices. Mine was alcohol. Yours may be excessively shopping. Yours may be a good meal or two, right? We all have our vices. But that is also an avoidance tactic of dealing with what is down at the root of it. I never dealt with the root. I achieved over it. I did my best to love over it. I did my best to get over it. But there are some experiences that we have in our lives that you just can't get over. You have to face it. And for the first time, I made the decision at 31. I gotta face this. I gotta look this pain, this historical trauma, the depression, the anxiety, the substance abuse. I have to look at it in its face and say that I'm gonna live through this. And I made that decision, and I got into therapy for the first time. And it was in therapy that I started to rewire my brain, because our experiences, it rewires our brains. It changes us. Again, it changes how you think and how you feel and how you look. And one of the things I realized is that what may be tolerable for you may be terminal for me. And what may be terminal for you may be tolerable for me. We all may have shared experiences here today, but we respond to them differently. And I had to give myself for the first time permission to not be okay. I've been sucking up this historical trauma and this year on top of year of unaddressed wounds. It's time for me to breathe. It's time for me to live and not merely exist in this world, but to live. And I was in therapy weekly. And I'll be honest, the first few months, I was like, why am I doing this? Why am I doing this? And then it started working. And then I started to see myself not out of the lens of my experiences, but I started to see myself on the other side of it. And I also had to address the spiritual trauma that I was in. Because one of the things that I thought is that I was doing what I was supposed to be doing. I was praying, I was meditating, and yet I was still going back to alcohol. Yet those suicidal thoughts were still showing up. And I said, God, 3 times in my life, 2 attempts, 1 plan, and I'm still here. And you know what the response was? Candace, you learned how to survive. You survived it. You learned how to survive, but you never healed. Many of us have learned how to survive things, but we never have healed from it. And being in therapy and allowing myself to say, nah, girl, you're going to feel this. You're going to have to feel it. In order to heal, you're going to have to feel it. I stopped drinking. And here I am today, about to celebrate 5 years sober. 5 years sober. 5 years. 5 years. But it was hard. It was messy. It was a lot of tears. It was a lot of anger. And there were a lot of vulnerable conversations. My mom, I love her down. She asked me a question after she found out that I was planning to take my life for the third time. She said, Candace, she said, why didn't you tell me? And I said, you didn't give me the space to. And it wasn't out of her being dismissive. It was, I didn't have a space to not be okay. It was generational. She didn't have a space not to be okay. My grandmother didn't have a space to not be okay. My great-grandmother didn't have a space not to be okay. So she said, I never dealt with the wounds of my life. I didn't know how to embrace you in that way. I just wanted you to be strong. And I said, what's your definition of strong? You just keep going. There are moments in our lives where we just can't keep going. You have to pause so that you can keep going. And that's what I decided to do. And I was honest, and I started putting language on my pain, and I started to say, I need help. So I started to form an ecosystem of support, which I call today my boardroom. And in that boardroom, everyone has their own seats. There's not one person that can give us every single thing that we need in this world, in this life. We need an ecosystem of support. And I started building that. I found someone that can keep me accountable. So those moments and times when thoughts arise and depression wants to creep back in and anxiety wants to come back up, that someone can say, Candace, don't run back to the bottle, call me. I had somebody that can pray with me and for me. I had my therapist. I had friends that would just come over and just sit with me. I had other friends that would come over and take care of the boys. I had to be honest with my employers. That's hard. Because a message along the way in my life said that if you tell people the truth, they're going to see you as less than. They're going to see you as less of a woman, less of a mother, less of an employer, less because you guys, by this time, I was a minister. I went to Howard and got my master's in social work. So on the outside, I was that strong friend in my group. I was the one where everyone came to. So how do I not have the answers for myself? I had to be honest and say, I'm not okay. And also rewire my brain to say that by me saying that, I am still a beautiful, an amazing, a gifted, a talented mom, friend, daughter. But I'm also human. I'm also human. And the thing that I love about the brain is one of the most powerful parts of our being, but it's also the most fragile. It's also the most fragile. And giving myself permission to take off this cape that a lot of us wear, that Superman and Superwoman cape that we wear, it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy. I had to take that cape off and wrap myself up in it. I had to take that cape off and wipe my tears in it, and knowing that it's okay to just lay it down. So I paused. For a whole year, I just took a step back and gave myself permission to just breathe through it. In the recovery, it was messy. It was not easy to sit with that little 5-year-old and say, it wasn't your fault. It wasn't easy sitting with that 16-year-old and say, yeah, you experienced a lot of domestic violence. You've endured it. You've experienced it. It wasn't your fault. And then I had to take accountability for my poor decisions in the process and forgive myself. And forgive myself. And that self-forgiveness, for me, sometimes it's easier to forgive others, but it is hard to forgive yourself. I had to forgive myself for the poor and risky situations I put myself and my children in. I had to forgive myself. Because when I was suicidal, there were things that I had to forgive myself in doing that my children was in the midst of. That was a journey within itself in order to do that. but giving myself permission to come home to myself, giving myself permission to say, Candace, you need you too. I had to shift the hierarchy in my life and know that it wasn't selfish, but to look at myself as this beautiful cup. And I'm the cup and I'm pouring into myself. Everyone else that's an extension of me, including my children, are the saucer. They're the saucers. They get the overflow. But if I'm not well, how am I going to mother them well? If I'm not well, how am I going to show up for my community? Knowing that you need you too is one of the most powerful, powerful messages you can tell yourself. And it also disarms you. So when you start to get those negative messages around you, well, no, you have to suck it up. You have to get over it. No, I don't. I have to feel it so that I can heal it, so that I can continue. So I had to put up some boundaries, and that wasn't easy. That wasn't easy to put those boundaries up and giving myself permission and saying no. I don't know about you, but no should be in your vocabulary. How many of you it's hard to say no? It's hard to say no. But understanding what your emotional and mental capacity is so crucial. Because when we overextend, now we are neglecting ourselves. And I realized I spent so many years people pleasing and neglecting myself and trying to heal like everyone else around me, that I wasn't really healing in the way that I needed to. That's why those suicidal thoughts for me just kept coming back, because I was never addressing the root. They just kept coming back. And in therapy, I realized that, no, Candace, girl, you need you too. And I also, when it came to the spiritual trauma, if I can share that with you all, because I come from a faith-based community, sometimes mental health and suicide is demonized, and there's so much stigma associated with mental health within our faith-based communities that too contributed, honestly, to me suffering in silence. You're not praying enough. Your faith, it's something wrong with you. And I'm like, God, you and I, we see, I'm communicating and I'm still dealing with this alcohol. Going to church Sunday after Sunday and getting in my car and reaching under the seat and drinking on my way home. That was my truth. So I had to deal with that. And it was in therapy that my therapist said, have you ever heard about the story of Elijah? And I said, no, tell me about Elijah. And it was for the first time that I saw mental health in such a beautiful way that embraces our humanity. And it showed me about a story of a man who was suicidal, who was depressed, who said, I've had enough. And I think we've all had that experience where we've had enough. It may not be to the point of suicide, but we all have had a point where it's just like, I've had enough of this job. I've had enough. I've had enough. And the way that Elijah was met by God with compassion. He attended to his physical needs first, because when you are experiencing mental and emotional distress, the body keeps score. The body keeps score. It absorbs itself within our bodies. The hypersomnia, the insomnia, the overeating, the poor appetite, the headaches, the aches. I was in so much physical pain that I didn't even connect the two. He attended to his physical needs first. Then he said, Elijah, come get away with me. And he addressed his emotional, mental, and spiritual pain. And God asked Elijah a question, why are you here? That's one of the first things that I ask my clients in our first sessions as it pertains to intake and history. And I said, God, you already know why he's there. Why would you ask Elijah, why is he here? He said, Candace, I wanted to give him the opportunity to put language on his pain. Sometimes people don't need a solution or a quick fix. They just need an ear and empathy and compassion. And I also realized, and this is something my mother and I talked about, when we don't know how to deal with other people's traumas and pain, we want to prematurely push them through theirs because we don't have the capacity. Thank you. We don't have the capacity to deal with it. He said, no, I want to give him the opportunity to put language on his pain. And then he gave him some time. The thing that I love is we don't know how long Elijah, can you all still hear me? We don't know how long, all right, we don't know how long Elijah was away with God. And I love that because sometimes people would try to use that against you. Girl, you've been in this for 3 months. All right, it's time to get up and get over it and keep it pushing. You've been in this for 6 months. It's time to get up, keep it moving, keep pushing. All right, it's been a year. Come on. We cannot compare each other's journeys. What may take me 6 months may take you 2 years. And what may take you 2 years, it may be a lifetime of navigating and learning from a healthy space. Because there are some things that we experience that you just don't get over. I just learned how to navigate. That 5-year-old little girl, that experience of the years of molestation, it's not something that I just have gotten over. There are some times, Jenny, I think about it and tears fall down my eyes. But I don't go back to having a trauma response. I don't go back to drinking that pain away. I feel it, I give space for her, and then I process it, and then I release it, and then I kiss her, and then I keep moving. But I don't get over it. There are some experiences that stick with us. Grief is one of them. I had to learn how to grieve. Grief is so multifactorial. It's not just one way in us grieving. I had to grieve the loss of self. I had to grieve the loss of relationships. I had to learn how to grieve and be okay with that and go through those stages of grief. But we can't compare each other's journeys and put timetables on it. And then the last thing with Elijah is that he went back out. God sent him back out. So that lets me know that there's life after our experiences. And we can retreat and pour into ourselves as often as we need to, as many times as we need to. Because we're going to experience trials and tribulations in this world. We're going to experience it. But the take heart piece is take hold of your community, take hold of your tools. That's the take heart piece so that you can overcome. And that is why I am still here 5 years later. That is why I am still here 5 years sharing that you can overcome and still embrace your humanity, because duality is healthy. We don't have to live in this either or mentality. You can be both and. I can have joy and sadness. I can be of support and need support. I don't have to live in this either or mentality. And once I got hold of that, it freed me. It freed me, and it allowed me to come home to myself. And as I journey through, I realize, and I live by this quote by Dr. Maya Angelou that says, as soon as healing takes place, you go out and you heal somebody else. As soon as healing takes place, you go out and you heal someone else. I never in 1,000 years imagined being in the space that I am in right now. I never saw it, never imagined it. But Maya Angelou said, as soon as healing takes place, that lets me know that our experiences is not just for me. One suicide impacts a community. But think about what healing can do. Think about what fostering these type of conversations can do. Think about what it's like to put a face on it. I hear it all the time. You don't look like someone that was experiencing suicidal ideation. You don't look like someone that had historical trauma. You don't look like someone that had chronic depression. You don't look like someone that went into a drug and alcohol treatment program. What is the look? What's the look? What does it look like? Can anyone raise their hand and tell me what it looks like? Oh, can you say that again? All of us. There is no look. We can learn how to dress it up. We can put on the suit and the dress. We can dress it up very well, but it's still there. But it's still there. There is no look. So what I realize is that our stories aren't just for us. It's for community. And just like pain changes us, so does healing, so does transparency, so does empathy, so does compassion, so does holding space for someone and asking them the question, what happened to you? Are you okay? And one of the other things that I always share, my mom and I talk about this, because the question has come up before. Just because you experience suicidal ideation does not mean you do not come from a loving family or that you don't have support. It does not mean that at all. There are some things we just have never dealt with before. There are certain conversations we've never fostered before to think that the thought of suicide will enter into your mind. And I remember my mom saying something to me one night. She said, Candace, I did the best that I could. And I said, and you did a beautiful job. And you are doing a beautiful job. And she said, I thought I was just teaching you how to be strong. I thought I was teaching you how to navigate. And I said, and you were. And going back to that both and it's okay not to be okay. I said, Mom, you don't have to be strong all the time. You don't have to seclude yourself and hide and cry. I can hold that space with you too. And when I said that, it disarmed her and it started fostering conversations through the bloodline. And that's how we shift. That's how we change. And that is something that I'm so grateful for, that I'm still here to share. Because if I would have made that final decision, December 2019, running off that bridge, I would have left so much unresolved questions and pain that I couldn't answer. And I also had to tell my mom, whatever you're holding on to, you have to release that. You have to release that. Because I didn't realize that she was blaming herself for my mental health. She was blaming herself for my depression. She was blaming herself. And I said, you had nothing to do with it. We do the best that we can with what we have and what we know. And once we gain more insight and more information, then we can foster community and we can have those conversations. But releasing yourself from the shame and the guilt is one of the things that also allowed me and my family to come home to ourselves. So the duality of life is just so healthy. Being able to know in whatever respective fields that you're in, that you can be in that space occupationally and still come home to yourself and know that your thoughts matter, your feelings matter, it matters. So after that attempt and going through that journey, I decided to go to a tattoo shop. And I love tattoos, I have 9 of them. And I got this tattoo and it says, breathe. It says breathe. And how I continue to breathe. Because if I'm honest, after 2019, even this year, sometimes we have experiences and it triggers us to a space where those thoughts re-enter. But now when those thoughts re-enter, I have the language, I have the tools, I have the community, and I say, come on, let's have this conversation. Breathe. It's a reminder to me that if I am still breathing, that means I still have a pulse. And if I still have a pulse, that means God still has a plan. And if he still has a plan, that means I'm not finished yet. There's still purpose. So keep breathing and taking it one day at a time. Keep giving tomorrow another chance. Know that you matter. Know that you deserve to be here. Know that you deserve to feel. Know that you deserve to be a human being. None of us are exempt. I think you said it. You said all of us. All of us. It's not about, and I say when it comes to mental health, because I get that question all the time, you're not someone that looks like, and I'm like, what's the look? There's no race. There's no face. There's no economic status. There's no denomination of faith. When it comes to this, we are human. We are human. And again, the brain is so beautiful. I love studying it, but it's also the most fragile. Knowing that your fragility is what makes you beautiful, your humanity, connecting with yourself and giving those around you a space to not be met with judgment, to not be met with criticism, to not be met with, well, I got over it, or this is how, no, no, no. Compassion, empathy, understanding, because we don't know the thoughts that enter into the mind. And those thoughts influences our feelings, influences our emotions, and then they show up in our behavior. Giving yourself permission to feel and giving others, and to keep breathing. Keep breathing. So I want to open up the floor, if that's okay. I want to thank you first, because to be able to sit in a space all day long and to gather so much rich information, I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for sitting with me in my living room and sharing space with me and listening to my story, because we all have one. We all have one. And I think when we share our story, shame dies. I think when we put a face to this, you may see your aunt, your cousin, your friend, your sister that looks like they got it all together on the outside and may have straight A's in school. Could be your coworker. I remember my coworker, Lieutenant Colonel William Greer. He told me I could say his name. So Lieutenant Colonel William Greer, he sent me a letter recently, and he said, Candace, the girl we thought we knew, you showed up every morning at work. We could see your dimples a mile away. Your infectious smile, your personality. You met deadlines. You were there. And he said, but what I didn't know is that you would go up to the 3rd floor throughout the day and just cry for hours and on your break. What we didn't know is that you used to go sit out in your truck on your lunch break and just cry. What we didn't know is that you would drive to the nearest lake and just sit out by the water thinking, should I jump in? He said, the girl we thought we knew. He said, I've known you since you was a little girl. He said, I never knew you were in that much pain. We think we know people sometimes, and we don't. Ask those questions. Those are what I call warning signs and risk factors. When someone goes through something, even if it might sound minute to you, ask questions. I know you just moved, you just got a new job, you just lost someone. Ask those hard questions. No one at the time was asking those questions because, again, remember that mask I learned how to wear well? I did all the things, but no one was asking those questions. How are you? What's going on? How are you handling this transition? It must be hard. Ask those questions. And he said, I'm so grateful you're here, but I also wondered if I would have pulled you to the side one day and asked you some questions, what that would have done for you. So he said, the girl I thought I knew. And he said, but now I get to know you. Now I get to know you. So I want to open it up before I continue, because I can talk. I want to open it up to anyone if you have any thoughts, questions, and I will be here throughout the day. Jenny said I can stay, right? I can stay. Is it okay if I stay with you all for the rest of the day? Okay, I can stay. So I'll be here throughout the day, but I did want to foster some dialogue, conversation with you all before we shift. Yeah.
Hello. Hi, my name's Jonathan Begal. I'm with the Napa Valley Register for freelance, but my full-time job is I'm a behavioral health worker over at Duffy's Napa Valley Rehab in Calistoga. And one of the things that we stress with our clients is you touched on it a little bit, the importance of taking things a day at a time. So I just wanted to ask you what that looks like for you, taking it a day at a time, even a minute or a second at a time through those things.
I vacate daily. I don't wait until Friday night or the weekend or have that star on my calendar. I have to vacate daily. One of the things someone said to me recently, especially if you're in the behavioral health field, they said, "How is it digesting pain daily?" And I said, yeah. And I also digest joy and celebration and happiness. But because I digest all of that, daily I have to vacate and I have to come back home to myself. So every day I find at least one thing that is not not connected to anything or anyone, right? For me. That's why I opened up with those questions, because when I was suicidal, I couldn't think about what I was grateful for, what gave me hope. There were some days, if I'm honest, that I could say it was my children. And then there were other days where I couldn't even see past that pain. Now I can answer those questions because I spent so much time with myself. I understand the art of self-love now, right? And self-compassion and self-grace. So in knowing myself, every single day, I have to pour back into myself so that I can continue. And it is an everyday thing. It's an everyday thing. Because just like, she shared earlier, we're not exempt. We're not exempt. And I'm very aware of my capacity now. My favorite word is no. It is without explanation, just no, period. Because of that people pleasing, right? I will over explain and no, I can't because the kids got to do this and I got a client and I got to catch a flight. No. So that is a part of my self-care and pouring into myself too, is boundaries. It's not always me touching something or doing something. Sometimes it's how do I honor myself, and being able to have strong boundaries is something that I have to do daily. And that's how I protect myself, and that's how I also pour back into myself, especially in this work, especially.
Hello, thank you so much for being here. My name is Guadalupe Aguayo. I'm with Aldea Children and Family Services. My question to you is for families and friends supporting people who are experiencing suicidal ideation. I recently lost a friend to suicide, and it was one of those experiences where we unfortunately were not surprised, and we often say, we didn't know, we didn't see the signs, that person would never do it. And then there's cases where it's even harder because we did know. What is your advice or your suggestions for friends and families who know someone is struggling but might be hesitant or uncomfortable breaching the subject?
Yeah. First, thank you so much for your vulnerability, your transparency, and sharing that. Thank you for that. It's hard fostering questions around suicide, especially if, to your point, you have some type of indication that this person is experiencing suicidal ideation. So it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable. And being able to just ask the questions. Ask the question. And in asking the question, you also have to be ready and prepared for the response. So that means you have to already have some tools in your toolkit, some resources at your fingertips. And it's not always easy to have that conversation. And I love, and I know you all are going to get training on this and just so much information today on QPR, question, persuade, refer. Finding hope in the midst of distress, that is challenging for the mind to take in at times. One of the things that I always say is normalizing the person's experience. It disarms the nervous system so that when you get to that part of the hope, that positive message can enter. Because right now it's just the pain, and you just want the pain to stop. You want those thoughts to be silenced. You want the pain to stop. being able to normalize a person's experience before you try to approach it. I understand how hard it must be right now. I understand that you just went through this life-altering event. Being able to normalize it so you can disarm their nervous system so that you can give that message of hope, so you can identify it. My message of hope was those two little boys in that moment, but I couldn't see, if I'm honest, past the pain sometimes to even see them, right? But once I realized that it was, again, okay not to be okay, and that disarmed me and normalized my experience, now you can get to the disease. Now you can get to the thoughts of suicide. Now you have a plan of support, and knowing that your community is going to be there while you go through it is something I always share with family and friends. But it first starts with you to say, can I be empathetic? Can I show understanding and compassion outside of myself and outside of what I think about the situation? Can I just meet them where they are with compassion, right? It opens up. So many survivors of suicide. Kevin Hine is a friend of mine. He jumped off of the Golden Gate Bridge, and he always shared the first thought that entered into his mind when he jumped was the regret, right? And Kevin shared with me, he said, Candace, I walked up and down that bridge for so long. No one ever asked me. He said, if someone would have asked me, I don't think I would have jumped. That empathy and that compassion, it really is a world changer in someone's world. To know that they're not being met with judgment and criticism, but kindness and love. I can't imagine what it's like to have those thoughts. I couldn't imagine, but I'm here. It disarms the nervous system. So that disarming is that first thing. And then again, you have to be prepared for the response if they say yes. If they say, you know what, yes, I do need help. And having those tools is what you're gonna need in that moment. Okay, let's go get you help. And also knowing your own capacity as a family member and friend, right? And being able to say, how can I journey with this person? In what ways can I authentically help without self-abandonment, right? Without neglecting myself, how can I show up? Because again, it has a tremendous impact on those that are left. It has a tremendous impact on those that love. It impacts the community. It has a tremendous impact. So did that answer your question? Thank you. Hello.
Hi.
Hi.
My name is Miriam. I'm the social work supervisor at Queen of the Valley Medical Center, also from the East Coast, from Jersey.
I hear it.
Yeah, don't sound very Napa. So in our role, we often see the patients right after the crisis. So meeting with a patient at bedside in the ED, very fast-paced, bilateral split, open arms, blood everywhere. It takes a toll, obviously, on us, on the caregivers providing every day these services the discharge planning needs. So in our role, it's hard to offer therapy, right? Because you're in a crisis. So you want to de-escalate and discharge to the people who can treat it. What advice would you give for burnout or not getting that secondhand trauma or working through it, since we're in one day I could have 4 of these cases,
Vicarious trauma is real, right? That secondhand trauma. In being in this field, in any regard, I feel like you have to be graced and called to it. You have to be graced and called to it. Because it's about saving lives, right? And also in saving lives, you also have to be able to save and guard self. Because when you have the type of heart that you have to be in this field, it can cause you to abandon yourself and just go, 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 go until you hit a wall or until your body shuts down and forces you to sit down, right? So you have to be able to say, what is in my self-care toolkit, right? And I always say self-care is bigger than pampering, right? That's a lot of times when we think about self-care, we think about pampering services, but it's being able to say, no, how do I pour into myself in order to serve the community? Because again, what it is that we take in, it impacts us, what you see, right? What you hear. And being able to disconnect as best as you can so that you can connect from self is something that is so important because you need you too. You need you too. And being able to say, how can I unplug? Because do you mind sharing what's your hours? Because sometimes people are like 4 days and then they're all for, it can be, 7 to 4, Monday through Friday. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and see, did you say weekends too? Sometimes we can take our work home with us. And I'm not talking like physically take it home. It's up here. Mentally and emotionally, you can take your work home with you and you're sitting trying to connect with your own family members and friends, but you're still carrying that trauma of what it is that you just experienced on the job. Being able to feel it and release it daily. Every single day. Being able to dump it out so that you can pour for the next day and finding what works for you daily. Like, how can you pour into yourself every single day? Because you do what every single day? You show up. You show up for others every single day. I had to learn how to show up for me every single day. And because I have 2 little boys, that looks different for me, right? So what I do is I vacate in my bathroom every single day. I create a sauna in my room. I turn on the shower. I let it get as hot and as steamy as it possibly can. I play some music. I light candles. I'll mindlessly scroll. I'll read something. I do something to be able to disconnect from the work daily. Because I can't wait till Friday. Sometimes I can't wait till the weekend. But in order to show up the next morning, I have to feed my own soul. And again, vacating daily is something that I had to learn how to do so that I don't get burnout. Learning how to say no and not picking up other shifts or other clients and knowing that I'm not the only therapist in the DC, Maryland, Virginia region. That was hard. But I learned that very quickly. I had a massive caseload and I burned out like when I say very quickly, like 2-3 months. I was over it. I said, I can't. But I had to learn how to do that and learning how to say no and learning that if you have PTO, use it. It's not just to save it because one of the things I had to learn, it was hard, is that if I'm not here, someone's gonna fill this seat. If I'm not here, someone's gonna fill this seat. But it starts here to say, no. What's your name? Yeah. Huh? Miriam? Miriam needs Miriam too. You need you too. You do great work. You need that great work for yourself. And when I learned that and shifted the hierarchy in my life, I find every little moment in time to say, Candace, what can you do here? You got 2 hours before you see a client. You have an hour before you have to pick up Braxton off the bus. What can you do to pour into yourself? And that's what keeps me going daily, is really loving on myself, just like I love on my community.
Okay, we have time for 2 more questions. We have one here, and then I see one up front. But we're here together until 3:30 today, so there's a lot more time for conversation. Candace is here until 3:30. I forgot to mention, we have a whole team of therapists here today to support any of you who might need support. We have 3 private rooms. You can find therapists there wearing buttons. We also have somebody stationed at our Suicide Prevention Council table. You can find somebody there to speak to and take a quiet moment. So please don't hesitate to use that time, okay? Lisa, and then Denise.
Thank you so much for being here, and God bless you
Thank you.
for sharing your story. I'm interested in that word vacate. And you finally described it, going into the bathroom. But I wanted to ask you, like, throughout the day, is there ways, even when you're in relationship with people, could you do that? Do you do that? And if you do, how do you do it?
Yeah, so throughout the day, I'm very intentional on what I take in, even with, community of family and friends, right? I have boundaries. I have boundaries, strong boundaries. And yes, I do every night vacate, right, into my bathroom or taking a walk, right, just being able to get out. But even during the day, like sometimes I have clients back to back, and I'm going to get this together because I know some of my therapist peers are they're going to be like, but sometimes I see clients back to back and I only have like a 10-minute break, right? I do a lot in those 10 minutes. It could be just moving my body. It can just be turning on music. It could be phoning a friend and having a conversation that has nothing to do, with the work that I do. It can be having a favorite meal. It can be taking a quick 5-minute drive, just so I can just feel the wind. It could be taking a walk, right? Grounding myself, taking a walk in the grass, taking off my shoes so I can feel the soil. I have to do those things because it sends different messages to my nervous system to ground me. And so sometimes I do not wait to the end of the day. I start in the morning, and then depending upon how my day looks, because it looks different, throughout the day, I have to do something in between. And knowing that I have control, for me in private practice, I have control over my calendar. There are certain days where days are just heavy. And because I have that therapeutic rapport, I'll be honest and say, I may, I'm supposed to see at 1, can we move to 3? That's me honoring myself if I'm honest, right? I'm still honoring my clients, but I also have to honor myself first so that I can honor them. Because am I gonna be my best self at 1 o'clock if I'm feeling overwhelmed or burned out? So then I'll take those 2 hours to do what I need to do to, all right, girl, and jump back in, right? But every day is different. But it really does start with the mind and what I'm thinking, because I prioritize myself so much now, because I know how it feels to be the last person on my list. The very last, and sometimes not even on that list. Now I have no shame in saying what I need. And today I need a drive. Today I need a friend. Today I need some ice cream, right? Today I just need to scroll. This is what I need, and I do it throughout the day. So that's how I vacate.
Beautiful. Thank you for sharing that.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for sharing all that specific ways in which you do that. And again, it's growing in our self-awareness, right?
Yes.
That's like tuning in, learning to tune in is, learning to slow down and pause and stop long enough to be able to do that.
So you can
And
keep
that's-
going.
Yeah, and trauma doesn't let you do that yet, Yeah. So, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah.
My name is Denise Bluell, and I'm with the Suicide Prevention Council of Napa County. I wanted to actually address Miriam. Where are you? I had your job for many years. I loved it. I didn't burn out, and I think the reason is because I had a partner. We covered the hospital, and we had a pact that if I got a referral for a child's death, maybe 2 days in a row or twice in a week, I said, can you take it? Or if she had something that she didn't want to deal with, she'd say, can you take that? And then every night we talked on the phone and we vented about our cases. And if we didn't do it that night, we did it in the morning. And so we just got it out of our system. It's really important to have a partner in that job. So wanted to answer that question too.
Thank you. Do we have one more before? Can this be the last one? Oh, well, two.
Hello, thank you for coming and sharing. My name is Caitlin Desimo, and I'm actually a Master's of Social Work intern with Queen of the Valley Medical Center. But I'm also speaking from personal experience and wanted to kind of talk more and open the door for the conversation regarding family and survivors of a loss of suicide. And I know that you talked a lot about, the person who is feeling suicidal having that shame and just how that carries into the families who have lost someone. Societal shame pushed onto the family members who, obviously had nothing to do with that loss. How do we address this issue? I know you mentioned it could be a religious or cultural issue too. Just based on that, what would you say? How do we open that conversation and stop that for those families?
Yeah, what we're doing here today. When you foster conversations, I just believe that conversations are so healing, right? Because you're putting a face to it, you're putting a family to it, you're putting transparency to it. And it's just like, wow, this person endured this loss and experienced it. And then they share their insight into how they are navigating life, right? And I think when it comes to putting a face on it, I spoke to so many persons who are actively suicidal. And once that connection of conversation through empathy is met, again, that's when the help, right? It starts. But that shame piece, when we suffer in silence and we don't want to put language on it and we don't want no one to know, it lingers. And when it lingers, it grows. And when you try to sweep things underneath the rug, it just becomes bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, right? Until it has to be addressed. And when we foster conversations such as this one, so I'm just so grateful, honored, and appreciative to you, Jenny, for inviting me, because that's how we shift the culture. That's how we shift this narrative. That's how we eradicate the stigma associated with suicide. It starts with us. Every single person that is here today, you are a mental health advocate, even if you're not professionally in the field. You are a mental health advocate because now you have the tools and the understanding and the empathy and compassion to go out and shift this narrative, right, of weakness, of selfishness. No, it's of our humanity. And I always say, again, what's tolerable for one person is terminal for the next person. So in fostering these conversations, it helps people in that space get the help. Because back in 2014, when I was suicidal and I was sitting in a military briefing, I heard this officer get up and say, well, anyone that's in this Air Force, this armed forces, if you're thinking about suicide, mind you, this was a suicide prevention training. If anyone is thinking about suicide, you're weak and you just need to get out of our armed forces. Mind you, I was in that space. Mind you, I was actively suicidal at the time. So do you know how I was feeling at that time? Do you think I shared with anyone that I was suicidal? But what if that space was different and we had conversations like this where there's so much love and empathy in this room and there is someone that's under the sound of my voice that was where I was in 2014? They would have I would have went up to someone after that. But because that gentleman got up in front of a whole room like this and said, you're weak, get out of our armed forces, and not one person debunked that, not one person said anything, I'm like, oh, so this is how everybody thinks about suicide. I dare not speak.
Yeah, and I appreciate you pointing that out because when I was 15, my 25-year-old brother committed suicide, and I felt like people didn't really know how to handle my trauma and made it seem like it was an inconvenience. And I think that that's important that we create those spaces where we have to, have people who are willing to come together to talk about that and not create those stereotypes and those stigmas. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you.
All right, we're gonna stop the questions. I know everybody in here probably has at least 2 questions they want to ask Candace, but again, she'll be here the rest of the day. Candace, thank you. I am so inspired. Thank you for not only sharing your story, but your heart and soul with us today. It was truly impactful. I know I can speak for myself. You've inspired me to share my story more. I really appreciate you being here and sharing your time in this space with us.